Dr. J, he treated me with class, even that early years in Milwaukee when I was nobody. And he treated me with class when he was an all-star. I remember that last game where he came out of the game for the last time in Milwaukee. It was really special because that's the first time we beat Philly in the playoff series. It was his last game. I was the guy on the free throw line that was shooting my free throws while he was getting that standing ovation coming out from the great fans of Milwaukee that respected him. And I looked at Dick Favetta or somebody. I said, listen, I don't need to shoot these. No one's watching me anyway. Just count them and let's move on.
I love it.
Paul Mokeski made 2 free throws.
It was pretty awesome.
And you are in Australia right now.
You're talking NBA basketball. You're talking great teams. You're talking great individual players.
Takes it off, and there's number 23, and of course Johnny goes nuts.
So we're all getting goosebumps thinking about it now.
I just tried to go out there and play my game.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Adam. I don't like anybody. I'm not a people person.
Strand, you made the pass, yes. Crespi, can you catch the ball? Yes.
All the stars were aligned and all the muscles fired at the right time, and I was able to get off the ground and throw one down.
I was saving that as a surprise for you.
And now, introducing your host for In All Airness, Adam Ryan.
Welcome to episode 96. Thanks for joining me. Today, I'm excited to welcome Kansas University's standout and 12-year NBA veteran Paul Mokeski. We cover a multitude of topics, moments, teams and players in an almost 2-hour conversation. A big thanks to great friend of the show, Jim McElvain, who mentioned my podcast to Paul and helped us connect. Paul was a key member of the super talented 1980s Milwaukee Bucks. He played 6 full seasons with arguably the best team to not make an NBA Finals in that decade. There's plenty of great anecdotes throughout as we cover Paul's experiences with Jerry West, MVP-era Moses Malone, Pete Maravich, Larry Bird, Julius Erving, the Run TMC Golden State Warriors, and plenty more. We also discuss Paul's post-playing career and his extensive coaching background. This is one of my favourite conversations yet. Towards the end of the episode, I'll share another great podcast review. You can add yours by visiting inallairness.com/review. Show notes for this episode, including links to numerous topics covered, will be available at inallairness.com/96. Now, onto the show. My guest today was a standout player in high school, literally and figuratively, and his name is entrenched in the record books at Kansas University, where he played all 4 seasons. He's a 12-year NBA veteran and has a wide array of coaching experience. Paul Mokeski, thanks for joining me.
You're welcome, Adam. I'm going to enjoy reminiscing and telling the most truthful stories I can without getting in trouble.
I'm really excited to chat to you, and thanks for making time to be here today. And thanks to a friend of yours and a friend of my show here, Jim McElvain, who helped connect us today. So thank you, Jim, for that. Really appreciate it.
Jim was at Marquette when I was with the Milwaukee. I remember watching some of his practices, and I actually worked with him in between his senior year and when he got drafted. And we've known each other a long time, but we just kind of reunited this summer here and brought up your name. I said, absolutely.
Great to hear it. Thank you. Now, just before we chat about your high school years, what sort of sports or hobbies were you involved with as a youngster?
I played almost all the sports when I was young, really young. Baseball, football to a point. We didn't really have soccer here, back then, or football. And basketball, obviously. I was okay in baseball. I was a good fielder. I played every position except catcher and shortstop.
Right.
I actually robbed 2 Jim Yantz. He played for the Milwaukee Brewers for a long time. We played Little League together, and I stole 2 home runs in center field from him one time. I played till about high school then. I couldn't hit a curveball, so that was the end of that. And then football, I would play touch and flag and all that, and I tried to play and put the pads on. I was really, really skinny. And then when I got hit the first time for real, I said, I don't think this is for me. So
understandable.
As I grew and really sprouted up, basketball became a passion for me. My dad played in college and played his whole life. I have a picture of me with a basketball in my hand since I was little, and we always had a hoop in the driveway. And it was something that I could go to and just by myself, a basketball and a hoop, and just kind of get lost in everything. And you know how as little kids, you just kind of imagine, playing or I imagined I was Jerry West. That's why I wore 44 for my whole career.
Aha, okay. I do tend to ask guests about reasons behind their jersey number, so that answers that one for 44. Definitely, that's fantastic. Were you always much taller than your peers?
Yeah, I was always taller. I was always, the kid in the back of the class picture.
Yeah.
Head and shoulders above all the kids. I really sprouted out. In 8th grade, I was 6'2". And then I went in high school, 9th grade, I was 6'5", 10th grade, I was 6'8", and 11th grade, I was 6'11". I grew, but our youngest son, Brian, grew like 5 inches in a year. He's 7'1" also, but I grew in increments, but I was always that tall and very, very skinny. When you see pictures, which you have, of me when I was young, I was super skinny, a little awkward. I was a very poor player in 7th grade. And then I worked on it and had a great coach and got really pretty darn good in 8th grade. But I was really skinny, kind of frizzy, out of control hair before froze were in. I really loved the game from the beginning, but a lot of it was growing up, I was very insecure off the basketball court. I was always the tallest. Everybody thought I was older, a little awkward, kind of gangly looking, and I didn't like to be around people or lines or a lot of people. But when I got on the basketball court, and at that point I was getting pretty darn good, I felt like I knew what I was doing. I belonged there. And that really is what really ingrained it in my mind and my heart was when I crossed that line, I would be out in social gatherings and feel very awkward. But when I was on the basketball court, everybody wanted me on their team, and I knew what I was doing, and I felt very comfortable.
According to newspaper reports, you led your, if I get the pronunciation wrong, please correct me, Crespi Carmelite Celtics?
Yep, Crespi Carmelite High School.
Okay, There you go. You led them to a 25-2 record as a senior, and I read that you averaged more than 20 points and 16 rebounds a game. So fantastic numbers there. And also one article said that you held at one stage 12 out of the 20 school records, even though you only played 2 years at the varsity level. In terms of your high school days, how deep into the postseason did you go, and what were the sort of memories you still have to this day?
The 4 years, Crespi Carmelite High School was taught by the Carmelite brothers. So, they were very tough and disciplined. Back then, if you did something in class or whatever, they might throw a book at you or put you up against the locker. So,
wow.
It's very disciplined. It was an all-boys school. I went there in 9th grade as a freshman. And all the good players that were around my area ended up going there. So I had played against them, and they were the best players on their team, and I was the best player. So we got there, and we were coached by a person named Bill Hedlund. And he played for Jerry Tarkanian at Long Beach State. He was very strong, looked like The Rock, and that was back when people didn't really lift weights. He was very disciplined, and he got us as freshmen, and we were really good. We were undefeated my freshman year. Then we played JV as our sophomores, and most people thought we should go varsity, but back then it wasn't done that much. So we played as a JV, and we lost just 2 games, the same group, and he came with us. And then he came with us as juniors and seniors. And when I was on the JV, we would play before the varsity. And at that point, I was 6'8". I had a power forward next to me, Jim Yent, who ended up going to Yale. He was 6'5". Another player that went to Cal State Northridge, he was 6. We were bigger than the varsity team. So we would come in the gym before, and everybody looking at us like, holy cow. And we just tell them, yeah, our varsity's a lot bigger, And the varsity, the tallest guy was like 6'4". But then we went into varsity our junior year. We struggled a little bit. We weren't bad. I think we lost 5 games. But in my senior year, we lost, I think, 2 games, one was in a tournament, and then one was the final game in the state Final Four. The teams in the Final Four were Bill Lambier, played for Palos Verdes, David Greenwood and Roy Hamilton, who went to UNLV and then on to the NBA, played for Verbonday. And we played Inglewood, and that was Reggie Theus's team. And Reggie Theus's team played us in the semis, and they had 3 6'8" guys, and they played a 3-2 zone with the 6'8" guys at the top and the smaller guys at the bottom. So I was waiting to have a field day. But the problem was our 5'9" and 5'10" guards couldn't pass me the ball because Reggie and those guys were too big. very tough time for me to lose like that. I was very frustrated, but I ended up owning a lot of the records. I still do. I've taken my sons there to show them that, yes, I did play, and I was pretty good. My scoring record of 42 points was broken by someone. I played without the three-point line. I didn't really shoot it back then, and he hit a lot of threes. My shot blocks in a game were 18. I had 18 shot blocks in one game.
Wow.
And then my rebounds in one game, my record's still there at 28. So I was 6'11", and I'm telling you, I remember my senior year when I broke the 200-pound mark. That was a big deal for me. So if you can think of a 7-foot guy weighing less than 200 pounds, that was me.
Great things there at high school. And one of the photos I did come across, I can't remember if it was from your high school days or once you were in college, but there is a photo of you with Reggie Theus. So I'll send that to you as well so you can check it out.
Yeah, he became a good friend. We played in some summer league together. Back then there was no AAU. That group, Brad Holland, who went to UCLA and played in the NBA, and a couple others, I think out of that whole area, we had 8 future NBA players. So we ended up taking a lot of the trips to colleges together. Like when I went to UNLV with Tarkanian to take a recruiting trip, Reggie was with me and Roy Hamilton was with me. We went to North Carolina, the same thing. When we went to Kansas. So we kind of traveled the same way and got to know each other.
What were the factors that actually ultimately led to you signing with Kansas and Coach Ted Owens at that stage?
I was recruited by every college, and I'm not boasting. That's just the facts. And back then there weren't any rules. I mean, coaches lived in a hotel by me from different schools for a month straight. They were at my house every day. They were at practice. I tried to get away from them. I have some stories of crazy stuff. My dad, who was parents were from Poland, and they came over on the boat and settled in Detroit. He was a rough and tough guy. He was about 6'4", but he was just tough and ornery. So he would jump down the coach's throat right away. Like, what do you want with my son? What are you doing here? And if they backed off, they didn't have a chance. If they stood up to him, so I'm here to recruit you, then he liked them. And Tarkanian and Ted Owens from Kansas, a couple coaches he really liked. But the bottom line is, when I took trips to Washington State, Arizona State, North Carolina, UCLA, those type of schools, I really liked it. I enjoyed it. When I went to Kansas, it felt like a college to me because I grew up in LA, outskirts of LA. Everyone, since I was, a freshman or sophomore, said, "You're going to UCLA." We know, and I was a UCLA fan. I watched UCLA all the time. I watched Lou Alcindor, soon to be Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Bill Walton was one of my heroes. I watched him playing. Back then, they simulcast the games every Friday night at 11 o'clock. I watched all of them. John Wooden, I just idolized him. But everyone had me pegged to go to UCLA, be the next big guy there. And I kind of went against the grain. And when I visited Kansas, it looked like a college in my mind. There was green grass, there's hills, there was brick buildings, there was ivy-covered brick buildings, there's a football stadium. And then Allen Fieldhouse was like Madison Square Garden, kind of. It was just an older building, but just phenomenal. And I fell in love with the place, and I fell in love with the people. Nothing against anybody, but in California, I didn't have any money. My family didn't have any money. My mom cleaned houses. My dad was an accountant. We scraped and scrapped to get by, and I drove an old beat-up car, in high school and even in college. But, people treated people like that differently. But when I went to Kansas, everybody was so friendly and so, on point that I really enjoyed the atmosphere. But the bottom line is, and I've told some people this, but not a lot, when it came down to it, I was torn between which schools. And then UCLA came in, and they were on me, but they came in at the end, and they came into my living room. And it was the year that John Wooden retired. So he was done. And Gene Bartow became the coach. Gene Bartow's a great coach. Offered me the scholarship. I decided Kansas fit better for me. To this day, I know in the back of my mind, if John Wooden would have sat in my living room and offered me a scholarship at UCLA, I probably would have took it.
Wow.
It's crazy how things like that happen, because I met my wife at Kansas. I met a lot of my friends at Kansas. If John Wooden wouldn't have retired that year, everything in my life would have changed differently.
Wow. Just through timing, it led to a completely sort of sliding doors moment in your life.
Yeah. It was an interesting time because I had never been on an airplane. I'd never been out of California area, and I got to go see other areas and fly on an airplane. And the other part, Back then, $100 handshakes when you went on visits was not unusual. So you go on a visit and shake the alumni's hands, and you might have $100 in your hand.
Wow.
Reggie or Bill or whoever, we'd get together on a plane and they'd ask how much I got, and I said, I didn't get anything. I'm like, shoot, they either don't like me, but I found out that early on in my recruiting, my dad, a school will not be named, when I came home from practice one day, there was a brand new car in my driveway, and I parked my orange jalopy and got out. Going into my house, the three coaches who were my buddies and always, gave me all the love I wanted, walked right by me, got in the car, and drove away. I'm like, well, what the hell? And I went in and I said, Dad, what happened? He said, those SOBs offered me that car for you to come to their school. They would give me that brand new car. And I told them to get the hell out of our house and never come back. So that word got out. So I never got any money.
Wow, that's unbelievable. I did read in one of the articles while I was researching that your dad said something on the lines of he was happy that you signed with Kansas because they didn't offer anything under the table, or words to that effect, and that played a big part in him and your family wanting you to play at Kansas.
Yeah, my mom and my dad were humble people, and they wanted to make sure I went to a place that I was taken care of, not monetarily, but emotionally. My coach, Ted Owens, just had his 90th birthday yesterday. And I told him that, going to Kansas, he was a great coach for me and helped me on the basketball court. But more than that, he was a big influence on how I became a man in college and with the wife I have and with the kids that we have. And that's a big part. And that's what my parents instilled in me. And that's what he wanted the college I went to do also. It really played out that way.
As a freshman, your Jayhawks went 13-13. And you played in 18 games that season, averaging about 10 points and a bit over 6 rebounds a game. So how did you find that transition from high school to the college level?
I enjoyed it. At that point, I started to get bigger physically, so I was probably about 215 or 220, so I could hold my own. I was super competitive on the court. I didn't care. I grew up in L.A. There was no AAU. We would drive around, my two buddies and me, and we would go to UCLA on Sunday morning, Pepperdine Tuesday night, at Verbunday and Watts on Mondays. We knew where the games were. We went in the gym. When I was in 8th grade, I was 6'2". I played center on my team, but I played guard in these pickup games and got the crap beat out of me. So I learned how to get up and fight and come back and get their respect that way. And so my freshman year at Kansas was a lot of the same. There was a lot of hype because I was the first 7-footer there since Wilt Chamberlain.
I was going to ask you about that.
That intrigued me because I watched Wilt when he was with the Lakers. I grew up watching him and Jerry West and Elgin Baylor. I actually, in 8th grade, we played at halftime of a Laker game.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I scored a basket.
At the Forum?
Yeah, at the Forum. I think the score was 4-2 or whatever, but because we were just finishing, and as we're finishing and getting off the court, the players are coming onto the court. And I remember looking up at those guys and my idol, Jerry West, because I like to shoot the ball. But Wilt was like, holy cow, look at that guy. So I was kind of intrigued by being the first 7-footer at Kansas since Wilt. It came with a lot of hype. I was really ready to do better than that. But before the first game, I pulled my hamstring. And if you look really back, and guys will know this, the story was I was in a small car, and getting out of the car, I pulled my hamstring, right? And that's not what happened. What happened was I pulled it in practice. It was around Thanksgiving because I couldn't go home. One of my roommates took me to Leavenworth, Kansas, where his family lived, to have Thanksgiving dinner. And so I pulled it in practice, and then when I got out of the car is when I was like, oh, man, this is worse than I thought. But anyway, it wasn't a little pull. It was a pull where part of the bone came away. So it was a long rehab. So I didn't play till after. I think my first games were at the Christmas tournament in Kansas City. I was hampered. When I look back, I've seen some footage of that. I was limping badly, but I still played, and I think I got first team or second team in that tournament. But, I kind of limped my way through my first freshman year there at Kansas. I was like everybody. I was homesick. I was half the world away from my home. I'd never been, didn't really know anybody. Had roommates that took, help, but at Thanksgiving, Christmas, they all went home. And I was there on campus alone. I remember walking from our dorm to Allen Fieldhouse and sitting in an empty Allen Fieldhouse and looking and hearing the echo and, just going, well, I play here, but God, do I want to stay here? It was just so lonely. But I limped through basketball-wise, but I grew personally-wise my freshman year at Kansas.
Okay, wow. So, yeah, thank you for elaborating there. Just a quick detour. Given that you grew up in California, did you attend many games at the Forum, or were you mostly watching TV games when they were on or listening via the radio? To the Lakers, that is?
Yeah, I watched on TV, Chick Hearn. We would listen to him and turn the volume down. The only two professional games I ever went to as a kid was I played in that Laker at halftime of the Laker game, so we got to watch that game. And then another game, my dad took me to the LA Sports Arena, and the LA Stars of the ABA, the old ABA, were playing there.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Yeah.
In your sophomore year, the Jayhawks went 18-10, and you played in 14 of those games. Your season ended, I've noticed, with a loss to Kansas State in early March of 1977, which I believe was the semi-finals of the Big 8 championship. How fierce were those Kansas v. Kansas State games? I can only imagine, I suppose, there'd be a lot of rivalry involved.
It was kind of a shock to me because I had grown up in California, and UCLA and SC was a thing. But at UCLA just won all the games. There was really no rivalry. And then when I went to Kansas, and the way the fans and the players and even the coaches reacted to those games, I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, it was intense. When Kansas State would come play at our place, our fans would be on them. I remember the first game we played at Kansas State, we get introduced, and their thing at Kansas State was, they're a farming kind of university. And I was introduced, and a live and a couple dead chickens were thrown at. And they're painted red and blue, the Jayhawk colors, and they like Jayhawk as a fictional bird, and
wow.
They were thrown at us, and they would hit the floor, and crap would go everywhere. I'm like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? I remember the next year when I was introduced, instead of going out to half court and whatever, I ran right to their bench and shook their head coach's hand because I knew they wouldn't throw a chicken at me over there. But the other rivalry that people don't know about is Kansas and Missouri. Now, Kansas and Missouri rivalry was as intense as that. Norm Stewart was the coach there, and Ted Owens was my coach, and they pretty much hated each other. They'd been a long time, and their fans, they were called the Antlers. They were the Antlers, and they would be merciless against us. Either my first or second year, we played at Allen Fieldhouse, and we're playing Missouri. And in the third quarter, someone got pushed in the back under the basket, and a punch was thrown, and all hell broke loose. Both benches empty. Coaches are yelling at each other half court. And I'm like, oh, my God. And it's interesting because the next week we watched it on film, right, because we're going to break down our film. And back then we didn't have this. It was 8mm. People, we're old. I'm old. I remember watching, and I'm seeing this action. I'm going, man, this is crazy. Because I remember – like I was kind of involved, but not really. I was kind of looking around and on. I remember watching, and the fight started under a basket, and it worked itself underneath where the stands come together. So it's kind of off the court in that corner there, and our fans were just everywhere. And I remember one of their players that hadn't played, he's in all his sweats, right? He goes running over there like he's going to be a hero, and then he's swallowed up by this crowd, and then a few seconds later you get him like almost thrown out of the pile. His sweats are all gone and his jersey's ripped off.
Oh, wow.
I'm like,
intense.
The rivalries were just that intense. And, after my first or second year, they became real for me also. That sophomore year, I was having a good year, and I actually, right before Christmas break, I broke my ankle. So I was out for at least 2 or 3 months, and I finished up at the end of that tournament. I almost transferred that year. I broke my ankle. I went home for Christmas for extended time. It was 2 weeks then. And I had a couple of friends that played at Pepperdine. And for those of you out there that don't know, Pepperdine University, it's on the ocean by the beach. They were hitting me hard. Why don't you come here? We live on the beach. We enjoy a cold one every once. I'm like, oh, boy. I stayed at Kansas. It was a year that could have been better. It was one that was frustrating because I couldn't participate the whole time, but it really led up to the best year, which was my junior year.
Well, that leads me beautifully into that junior season. It speaks of your determination, though, that you stayed there, given that you're talking about sitting in the empty Allen Fieldhouse and hearing the echo, thinking about what could be back on the other West Coast.
And that goes back to my father, my dad. We talked about it, and he said, you're staying there, you're going to get your degree, and you're going to have great. And he pretty much shut the door on that thing. And I was like, yes, sir.
Your junior season was a great one. The team went 24-5. You led the team in rebounding with 8.5 a game and blocks 1.9 and scored almost 10 points a game. And the Jayhawks actually had their first NCAA tournament appearance since 1975. So sort of how was the atmosphere of playing in the tournament, and sort of what memories do you have from that standout season?
It was an awesome year all around. I got myself acclimated to growing up and being a man and monitoring my time and my classes and my social stuff. And at that point, I guess you could call me big man on campus. And, I was enjoying that. And I was having a great year on the court. We had a great team. We were really well-rounded. We had Darnell Valentine was a freshman point guard. That was one of the top point guards coming in. We had a great group of guards that were there for their senior year. We had Donnie Von Moore and Ken Kings, who was my roommate there, both 6'9" and 6'10". We could go small, we could go big. I wasn't looked at to have a lot of scoring on me, but I was to anchor the defense, block shots, rebound, and I enjoyed doing it. And we were winning. I think we lost that year to Kentucky and Arkansas, I think, in the regular season. And those are two great teams. And then I remember we had lost, I think we were 13-1 in our league. We were 13-1. We were the top of and the one game we lost at Nebraska, guy hit a half-court shot, and we lost the game. So we almost went through the league undefeated. And back then, it was the first year of the Big 8, they call it. It's the Big 12 now. And they put in the postseason tournament that year. And we had a Christmas tournament where all the teams played. Then we played the regular season twice. And then now we have a postseason. And we were ranked top of anybody in our league, obviously. We won the league. We're 13-1. I think we beat Kansas State, and then I think we beat Nebraska, and then we came up against Oklahoma for the fourth time that year. We beat them 3 times. And Oklahoma had a really good team. I'm sorry, but we were better, but they had a really good team. And meeting them for the fourth time, they played better that night, and they beat us in that postseason tournament. Back then, there weren't as many teams in the NCAA. I think there was maybe 32, not 64. So if you didn't win your conference or your postseason tournament, only a handful of teams went to the tournament even. So it was different. That game cost us. The next round would have been played in Wichita, Kansas, and the Elite Eight was going to be played in Kansas City, Kansas. The Final Four was somewhere else, I can't remember. But anyway, so instead of doing that, NCAA in their ultimate wisdom sent us out west, and we played in Oregon against UCLA, first round, against some of my old friends, David Greenwood, Roy Hamilton, Brad Holland, all NBA players. And we went out there, we played in Oregon in their old gym, and we played really well. And quite frankly, they were surprised we were as good as we were. But then at the end, back then there's no 30-second clock, so everyone ran that four-corner stuff, a little delay game, and Darnell Valentine you could not take the ball from him. Impossible. We were up by like 10 points with 5 minutes left or whatever. We had a lot of people in foul trouble. Coach was going to say, hey, let's get into our four corners, make them foul us and end this thing. And we were all pumped up. No, let's go at them. We'll kick their butts. And that's what we did. And ended up 4 of the starters fouled out. I was the only one left in the game. And I think we lost by 4 or something like that. That's one of the only games in my whole career, one of about 5 games I cried afterwards because I knew we had a chance to beat UCLA on the West Coast, and all my buddies would have seen it. And I was the first non-winning player to win the TV player of the game. I won that player of the game. I had 18 points and 12 rebounds, but that was a tough, tough loss. The next team we were going to play, I think, was Arkansas. I wanted another shot at them because they had beaten us that year, and then we could have made it to the Final Four, I think. But
your recall's fantastic. I'm looking at the details of the game now. You had 18 points and 12 rebounds in 32 minutes. The final score was 83-76. I did read in the recap of the game on a few different newspaper reports that, 3 or 4 players had fouled out, and then also you had other players who had 4 fouls, so foul trouble reigned supreme, unfortunately, and I guess it would have been an extra sort of kick in the stomach to eventually lost to UCLA, a team that most people thought you were destined to actually go and play with.
I remember because my friend from high school went to Yale. He played at Yale, and my other friend went to Duke. He was a guard at Duke. And I remember back then, Duke wasn't that good, and both of them were on spring break, and both of them were watching the game, and they remember looking at the game because they always would drive through and play with our guys before they went on to their school, before the school season. And they looked and it cut away to our game, and they're going, why is Mo the only starter in the game? Where is everybody else? Why is everybody else on the bench? All the good players. And that was why.
Yeah, foul troubles. As a senior, if I have this right, you were a co-captain with a guy named Brad Sanders, and you started every game, averaging over 14 points a contest, and you led the team in rebounds again, 8.3 boards, and the team went 18-11. You also had 13 10-rebound games, so obviously you were a force on the boards, of course, and were a Big 8 all-tournament selection. Looking back on that senior season or your whole college career, what might be the fondest memory that you have from that time, Paul?
Well, I think, looking back at that year, after our game against UCLA, Sports Illustrated came out, and we were a top 10 team, supposedly, because we had Darnell Valentine, one of the best point guards, and then me as one of the best bigs in the country. But they overlooked the great players we lost and the leadership we lost. So I think we got our chest puffed up a little bit, and we weren't ready to carry through with that. And quite frankly, we weren't a top 10 team at that point. But so I remember that as a disappointing season. I remember being very disappointed because the last 2 games of the season, a lot of teams played zone against us back then, and I didn't get a lot of touches. And I remember a couple of teams at the end of the schedule, they played man, and my eyes lit up. And both those games, I had over 30 points in both those games. And I was ready to keep going, and we didn't make it to the NCAA, and for whatever reason, NIT, we didn't go. But fortunately, Del Harris, who was the coach of the Houston Rockets, saw me in one of those games. He was coaching Moses Malone in Houston the year before, and he saw me and saw something in me. But I remember my career at Kansas being good, not as good as I would like it. Injuries hindered me my first 2 years, but I remember it as being what I wanted it to be. The college experience, the campus, the fans, Allen Fieldhouse, the feeling of coming out of that tunnel in Allen Fieldhouse was just undescribable. I felt so attached to that because we talked about how I sat in there alone thinking that I wonder if I can stick this out to where I became a starter and a star there, to where 2 years later I proposed to my wife on the steps of Allen Fieldhouse.
That's awesome.
I just remember everything fondly. I try to forget about, the injuries or the tough losses, and made great friends and met my wife there. So how could it go wrong 38 years later?
Fantastic. And congratulations on that. Your name is still throughout the record books. You ranked 18th all-time in career rebounds, and you're 13th in block shots, and played, I think, 89 games in total. So had you played more games, of course, those stats would be even more impressive. So that thing about Del Harris, that obviously makes sense when we get to the 1979 NBA draft. You were selected with the 20th pick of the second round, and so that's 42nd overall by the Houston Rockets. Do you recall where you were on draft day, and how did you find out the Rockets had selected you?
I was in Lawrence, Kansas. I was playing in a softball game with a bunch of my buddies. Back then, it wasn't what it is now. It wasn't a show. There wasn't ESPN and being interviewed. Who is this guy? Shoot, they probably didn't have film on me. So I remember thinking, didn't have an agent. Man, my goal is to get drafted somewhere, go and make the team and play 10 years in NBA. That'd be awesome. But I wasn't consumed, and I wasn't waiting by the phone. And back then we had no cell phones and we had no internet. So you literally had to wait by a phone. So I went out and played softball with a bunch of my buddies. And then I got a call from the Rockets when I went back to my dorm room that they had drafted me and they're excited to have me. And Del Harris said, well, you'll come in, blah, blah, blah. And then I told all my friends, and we went out and had a good time. And I remember going to a pub, learning that I got drafted by the Rockets, and they played Rocket Man. Elton John's song. I was like, oh, that's awesome.
I love that. Under Del Harris in Houston, you saw playing time in 12 games as an NBA rookie. Boxing Day of 1979 was the last regular season game you took part in. What was that experience like being an NBA rookie, given that you'd started every game to close out your senior career at Kansas?
I didn't go to training camp with any delusions of being an all-star or anything like that, or even be a starter. I just wanted to make the team. The Rockets back then had a loaded team. I mean, Moses Malone was MVP of the league the year before. Rudy Tomjanovich was on that team. Calvin Murphy was on that team. It was phenomenal. Rick Barry was on that team.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just a veteran-laden, very experienced, very good team. And I remember going to Houston before training camp, and Moses and those guys took me to, man, I can't remember the name of the gym. It's a legendary gym there, and it's hot as hell. It's like a Cracker Jack box, but that's where all the pros go to get ready. And getting in that gym and playing against Moses Malone, and Spencer Haywood was in there, and other guys, I'm like, holy cow. And then I remember going to training camp and just trying to hang on. Man, if I can make this team. I remember making the team, but being on injured reserve the first time because they had different numbers. And I didn't play in any games, but I bet I would rate that as the most learning experience of my career. And the reason being because I guarded Moses Malone every frickin' day in practice. I learned from him every day. I learned how to be a pro. I learned how to play hard. I also learned about 7 days into training camp, I was walking in the gym with Rudy Tomjanovich, who I idolized also, and Moses pulls up in some other colored Rolls Royce. I'm like, T, that's like his seventh different car. How many cars does he have? He says he has 7, one for every day. I remember just learning from him every day, playing as hard as I could in practice. And Moses, rest his soul, was one of the best pros ever. He spoke with like really low voice and would kind of, stutter, hey, Mo, what do you, but everything he said was important. And everything he said, whether it was in practice, on the bench, on the airplane, in the airport, I listened to. That's what I remember about that year. I remember, not playing much, but still being happy as hell. And I'm with the Rockets.
Thanks for sharing those memories. Interestingly, Houston was actually in the Eastern Conference in 1980.
Yeah, we played the Celtics in the East Finals.
I had to do a double take because I had forgotten that was the case. So interestingly, that means that you got to watch Larry Bird, who obviously put an end to your season. Did you ever meet or watch Bird before in college, or was this the first sort of chance you got to see him up close playing?
I played against Larry in the Pizza Hut Classic. That was a college all-star game for seniors in Las Vegas. That was the first time I played against him, and I guarded him.
Oh.
Then I saw him, I think the week before. You'd have to check my facts, but the week before I saw him play in the Final Four. I saw him and Magic play. I was at that game.
Oh.
There was another all-star game at the Final Four in Utah, Salt Lake City, that was played the night before. So I played in that all-star game and then had great seats for that game.
Wow. Okay. I didn't actually come across that in my research. That's great.
That year, we had Magic and Michigan State had kicked our butts in Michigan State. So I had played against him, and I hadn't seen Bird play, heard about him. And then when I watched them together play against each other, I was like, this is something. I could tell it was something special. It wasn't like two stars going against each other. This was something more than that. I could tell that at the Final Four.
Boston defeated you guys in a sweep at 4-0, and Larry averaged just a cool 20 points, 8 rebounds and 6 assists per game across that series. This is the Eastern Conference semifinals, this was. You beat San Antonio in the first round, 2-1, and then lost 4-0 in that semifinals. But yeah, I was thrown by the fact that you guys were in the Eastern Conference. It doesn't sound right.
Yeah, it's so weird. And that's the only time I saw Pete Maravich. Pete Maravich was on that Boston team. I remember in one of the games in Houston sitting on the bench, and the game was going on, and here comes this guy with messed up socks, skinny as hell. His knees were freaking knock-kneed. Coming in, I'm like, what is he going to do in the game? And then he comes in the game, and whips a pass, makes a three, does an alley-oop. I'm like, holy cow. That stands out in that series too.
In October of 1980, Houston traded you to Detroit for a 1982 second-round pick. Do you remember first hearing of the trade, and what did you make of that move to Detroit?
That was the first, not shocking, but aware of being a professional athlete in professional basketball that I got. I loved Houston, loved the team. I remember battling for a spot on that team. It was supposed to be between me and another guy, Steve Hayes, another 7-footer from Idaho State. And we battled every day in practice. They kept us after practice. We ran extra. We played. And they were telling us that one of you guys is going to make this team and one of you is not. And then I remember they made a trade for Billy Pulse, then another center. And this was right at the end of training camp. I thought I made the team because Steve got cut. And then my future wife, she wasn't my wife then, Linda, was there with me. And then they told me that they traded me to Detroit. I think it was 1 or 2 days before the season started, whatever that was. And I was in shock. I was, and I was angry, and I was, I didn't know what was happening. My dad's from Hamtramck in Detroit. I have relatives in Detroit, so that helped. But I remember that was my first real, this is pro basketball. You're a commodity, and you got to go.
The 1981 season, the Pistons went 21-61. You had a really good season, though, individually. In only 23 minutes a game, you averaged over 7 points and 5 rebounds and played 80 games during the season. So in terms of your on-court production, you definitely made an impact there. What do you recall about that one full season there with the Pistons?
That's what now as a coach for over 25 years, I realized that, Del Harris traded me. And I was angry at him, but he was doing me a favor because he was putting me in a situation where I would actually play. Me and Kent Benson switched off starting that year. I started a lot of games. I got more playing time than I ever would have gotten in Houston, and I grew as a player. And that was one of, if not the best year. The only 2 games I missed, too, were when my dad had cancer. So I went home for 2 days, and he had surgery and came out of it at that time. If that wouldn't happen, I would have played all 82 games. So I really that was the year I established myself amongst other coaches and teams and myself that, hey, I can play in this league. I can play in this league.
There's some great numbers there for sure. In 1982, after a 23-29 start to the season, Detroit traded you, along with Phil Hubbard and a couple of future picks, to Cleveland for Kenny Carr and a guy we've already talked about, Bill Laimbeer.
Yep.
When you heard the deal had been done, what were your thoughts about becoming a Cavalier?
That was another brush with, okay, you're a commodity here, because I'd had a good year the year before. We were struggling. It was Isaiah Thomas's rookie year and Kelly Tripucka's rookie year. We were an up-and-coming young team. We weren't there yet. Jack McCluskey was the GM, and he is really smart GM. I remember I got traded 15 minutes before the trade deadline.
Wow.
My wife and I, we got married. We bought our first house in Detroit area. And I had asked the front office, I said, listen, we're thinking about buying a house. And, oh, yeah, you're good to go. You're okay. Famous last words, right?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if this is good or sad that I remember this stuff, but we were at a team party. It was after a game, and we had played Houston. Moses Malone was there, I think. We played them. And I'm sitting at the table with my wife, and everyone knows the deadline is midnight, right? So we're sitting there, and it's at the Silverdome, like around 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock, whatever it was. Jack McCluskey and the head coach kept popping in and out of the room. And I looked at Linda and I said, something's going on, man. I hope it's not us. Something's going on. And then we stayed until about 11, I think. And I said, okay, let's go home. We made it. And then when I got home, I got a call at noon from Bill Musselman, who was the Cleveland. And he said, Mo, we just traded for you. I need you to get on a plane tomorrow morning.
Wow.
I'm like, Coach, I just got in the house. The rule in the league is 4 days or whatever. You get to report, something like that. But he talked to me, and he talked me into, and the type of guy I am, I said, okay. I got on a plane at 6 a.m. that morning to fly to Cleveland and play against Houston the next night.
Wow.
I had to take a taxi from the hotel to the game, and I was walking down the ramp, and the Houston bus was there. I followed them in and got right behind Moses Malone, like right behind him. And I tapped him on the shoulder, and he looked around and said, "What are you doing here?" "I'm following you, Moses. I'm following you. Wherever you play, I'm playing." That was hey, anything can happen. To this day, I wonder what would have happened. I mean, I wasn't Bill Laimbeer, but I could play that role. I wasn't the bad guy, but I could shoot from the outside. I could rebound. So, it's only human nature to think, would I have a couple championship rings?
Yeah, exactly. Only human to think that, for sure. I really appreciate you sharing those stories. What did you make of the time that you were there with the Cavaliers? And they were struggling at the time in terms of their on-court performance.
I had been with Houston, which was very organized. Detroit, we weren't good my second year, but he got Isaiah, and they were getting better, and they knew what they're. When I went to Cleveland, it felt very up in the air, disorganized, hectic. Leadership was not from the owner to the general manager to the head coach. It wasn't there like it had been in the places I've been. And the players that were there were in tough situations. We were not good. Fans knew we weren't good. I mean, my wife jokes to this day, she would have a conversation with another wife in the stands of the NBA game, and other people could hear her. It was that quiet. There's nobody there. I got to meet some great guys, but I remember it as being in disarray.
Just before Christmas of 1982, Cleveland were 3-21 at the time. They waived you. And then on Christmas Eve, you signed the first of 2 10-day contracts with the Milwaukee Bucks. And then I think it was mid-January of 83, you signed a contract for the rest of that season with Milwaukee. At the time you joined them, they were back-to-back Central Division champs, and they went on to win the division 6 straight years. So how important to your career was that decision to join the Bucks, do you think, Paul?
It was very important, changing as much as if I would have went to UCLA. I was traded right before Christmas. I was starting for them. I was playing really well. Disarray was they had 14 guaranteed contracts, and I didn't have one. Even though I was starting, I didn't have one. I was just playing good. And I remember I was packed and ready to go on a long West Coast trip, 2 weeks. So I had all my suitcases and everything getting ready for my wife to take me to the airport, and I got that call. I remember asking them, "You mean you couldn't get anything for me? Like a second-round pick? Nothing? No? No one's interested." So I hung up the phone, called my agent, made the calls. People knew I had about 4 or 5 teams that were interested in signing me to 10 days at that point. Milwaukee was one, obviously. The other one that would have changed my life was the Lakers. The Lakers, Mitch Kupchak had gotten hurt, and the Lakers called, and they wanted me to sign a 10-day. And I picked Milwaukee because I thought Bob Lanier's in his last couple of years, Don Nelson I like as a coach, and that I might be able to be a starter there, and my career can grow from there. So that's why I chose Milwaukee, and my wife had to pack up the Christmas tree as I went to play for Milwaukee for 2 10-days, and then they signed me for the rest of the year. But that was an important decision that today, when you look back, you're like, we went to the Lakers, I'd be playing with Magic and backing up Kareem or something. But, that's just what it is.
Milwaukee was one of the greatest teams of the 1980s, undoubtedly. Of course, I don't need to tell you that. But there's that what if, of perhaps going back to California and playing with the Lakers. You played in 50 of the team's remaining 53 regular season games that year with the Bucks. And just getting to the playoffs, you guys dispatched of Larry Bird's Boston Celtics 4-0 in a sweep.
Yeah.
In the Eastern Conference semifinals before you ran into a buzzsaw, the 1983 Philadelphia 76ers.
It was 4-5. We got one game.
Yeah, true, it was. It was 4-1, exactly. Philly went on to win the title that season, of course. What are your memories about that first season there in Milwaukee?
I really felt part of a team. I really felt like I was a backup, which I was fine with. I was always ready to play. Don Nelson knew how to use guys like me. I was valuable to him because I didn't make many mistakes. I could perform when I needed to. Bob Lanier, Brian Winters, Junior Bridgman, Marcus Johnson, how good they were. And I remember how good they were as a team. And I remember the intensity of the playoffs. I remember how quiet the Boston Garden was when we swept them out of there, and how happy Nelly was, and how small the locker rooms were. And I remember losing to Philly. We should have won one more game, I think. but how great they were. But the atmosphere, and that was the first touch of the playoffs. Out of my 12 years, I was involved in the playoffs 9 of those 12 years, and that was the first one that I was involved with where I was actually played. And I didn't play much that year. I played a little bit here and there, but just getting that experience was important.
In the 1984 playoffs, you played all 16 postseason games. Boston exacted its revenge on your Bucks this time round. Prior to meeting the Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals, you defeated Atlanta 3-2 in round 1 and then beat New Jersey 4-2 in the semifinals. Having played all 16 games in that postseason, what comes to mind from that extended run in those 84 playoffs, Paul?
The year in Detroit, I realized I could play in the league. That year, I realized I could be a good player in the league and a valuable asset to a team, especially in the playoffs, for what I was. You know, I was a role player. I was always ready. I was a great teammate. I could knock down open shots, set big picks, dive on the floor. That's when I realized that I could actually play against the best players and be effective. I'm not going to score 30 points or whatever, but I remember that as being, okay, I got a career. I can play with these guys at the highest level. That was very important to me, and that my value in the league went up that year.
1985 was one of your best individual seasons. You played in 79 regular season games and had your second best scoring output and rebounding output of your career in only 20 minutes a night. When we get to the 1985 playoffs, you met rookie sensation Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. You beat them handily 3-1, which some people overlook, before exiting in the conference semis to the 76ers. Just for context, though, in that series against the Bulls, you averaged 9 points, 6.8 rebounds, and 2.3 assists in the series, which is great numbers there. What do you recall about the 1985 season and perhaps those early meetings with the young Michael Jordan?
I think MJ played against us in his first real game, I think. I maybe. But I remember, his early on video where he comes down the floor and he rocks the baby and dunks it. Mm-hmm. That was against us in Mecca. We were a way better team than they were. As great Michael Jordan was, we were better than them. And I remember that series because I think I almost had a triple-double, I think. I had 11, 10, and they tried to press us, and Nelly put me in the middle of the press. I was just passing the other guys. But did we lose to Philly that year?
Yeah, you did. It was a 4-0 sweep, unfortunately.
I remember that was the start of beat the Celtics, lose to the Sixers. Beat the Sixers, lose to the Celtics. I remember that.
I'm just looking at your schedule now. Your first 2 regular season games were against the Bulls in 84-85. You hosted Chicago, then you were at Chicago. So interesting. Yeah, you got to face Jordan a couple of times early and then ended his season as well.
I think the last game in the old stadium in Chicago, I fouled Michael Jordan really hard, and he hit the ground and laid there. Fans were just all over me. And then he bounced up and shot his free throws. I remember telling him, hey, rookie, don't do that to me, man. I want to get out of this arena alive.
I can imagine that would have been all over you. The last game of the series was at Chicago. You closed it out there in Game 4. I looked at basketballreference.com, which had some fantastic information, which helped me research for the chat today, of course. On March the 28th of 1985, you had a career-high 21 points in 29 minutes at New York in a big win over the Knicks. 121-116 the score was. Does a game like that, do you have any memories of that career high in terms of points, or are you more focused on rebounding, blocks, that sort of stuff?
I remember that game because, if I'm not mistaken, Bob Hill was the coach of the Knicks. Bob Hill was an assistant coach at Kansas for 2 years when I was there.
Ah, okay.
And I had known him for a while, and I was on a roll for me. I mean, I was scoring and I was making my jump shot, my hooks. And I remember about halfway through, getting fouled and going to the free throw line, and Coach Hill looking at me and saying, Mo, why are you doing this against me? I always loved to play in Boston Garden, Madison Square Garden, the old Chicago Stadium. Those places I loved. I just loved playing in there. They had a feel to them. And I think, I'm not going to I think I had like 12 boards or something. I think I had like one of those games that afterwards I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I should try and do this more often. But doing it in Madison Square Garden makes it even more memorable.
There was an early February game in 1987, and as soon as I say this guy's name, I think you're going to know where I'm going. You were involved in a bit of a fracas with Charles Oakley of the Chicago Bulls.
No.
If the Skype call suddenly ends, I understand. You had a broken nose from an incident with him in a game at Milwaukee, and then you were both ejected. Your Bucks ultimately won the game. But this happened just before the 87 All-Star weekend, and I think you only missed, well, at least initially, you only missed one game, even though you had a broken nose. Do you remember, well, obviously you probably remember the incident, but how were your future matchups then against Charles Oakley from that point forwards?
Yeah, evidently I don't like Charles's because I had that and I had one altercation with Charles Barkley also. And he got the best of me there. It was just on TV. They brought it up when the Bucks were playing in their series. They had the footage of that.
Is that where it was like you're at centre court and Barkley sort of came towards you and swung at you?
Yep. Oh, yeah.
I remember seeing that. I thought, what is going on there? So what can you sort of tell us about that incident with Oakley, and then how did that one with Barkley come to be, if you don't mind me asking?
With Oakley, we had gotten tangled up under the basket. We're both physical players, both big guys, and we got tangled up, and our elbows got up high. And so when we were separated, we're looking at each other. Like back then, guys threw punches in games. You had to defend yourself. And I went to get my hands up, and they were down at my sides because one of my teammates, I won't name him, grabbed me from behind. So he had my arms locked. Oakley got a shot, bam. He hit me square in the nose, and then I got free and chased him, and he backed up a little bit, and then Jordan grabbed me. But there was blood everywhere, and I was let off the floor. So I walked by, and Don Nelson's the coach, and he looks at my face. He goes, "Jesus, Mo, don't get any blood on my tie."
What a caring guy.
Here is the battle. Paul Mokeski and Charles Oakley. Mokeski mugs him, and then they come out of it. Mokeski rakes Oakley's face. Charles, pow! Mokeski's in the hospital with a possible broken nose. Both were ejected.
My wife took me to the hospital, and I got in a chair. And anybody that broke their nose before, which I've had mine broken like 5 times maybe, they have these little long paddles that they have, and they put them inside your nose, and they straighten it out if it's crooked. That's how they do it, and it hurts like hell. So I got in a chair. I'm getting ready for it. He's got his paddles, and he looked at me, and he looked around, and he goes, "Hey, you're okay. He broke your nose straight."
So you can maybe thank you, perhaps.
And then the Barkley incident was, it was in a playoff game, I think, and it was really my fault because we were always physical and everything, and we made a basket, and at the end of the basket, for one stupid reason, I kind of caught him with the elbow, you know? So I'm running down the floor, and it's loud in there, but I know something's wrong. I could feel it. And I could feel it, and the crowd's still going crazy, and I turn around at half court, and he's running right at me. So I throw like an elbow, and he throws a punch, and he gets me, and I go down for a minute, and I get back up. But there's a picture in the paper, and it looks like those boxers that both throw punches at the same time.
Well, here it is. Here we go.
Hey, why you push Mokeski? Because he pushed me. Man, stop it, man.
Come on, what's it?
Oh, come on. Oh, he had to get a hole. Oh, go down goes Frazier. Down goes Frazier. I'm sorry, Paul. Paul's a nice guy.
Back then, there was no wolf tickets. If you trash talk, you're going to square up sometime. And I think that led to less trash talk. Most guys now, they get an altercation and they're like acting like they want to come at you. At the same time, they're telling their teammate to hold them back, hold me back, hold me back. Back then, there was no holding back. Well, my recollection, I don't even think they called a foul. I mean, today we would both be suspended forever. I think they broke us up. They got to the huddle, the referees huddled, and they went to both of us and said, "Knock it off." And then I think we continued to play.
In 2019, you'd be looking at jail time.
Yeah, exactly. Flagrant 12, whatever they were saying.
That's fantastic. Thank you for elaborating on it. I wanted to ask you, I was curious, but I didn't want to get too in-depth there.
I saw some real fights back then. Calvin Murphy was a Golden Glove boxer, by the way. Little guy, 5'10". I saw him knock out a 6'8", 250-pound guy.
Wow.
2 punches. Bam, bam. The guy never saw it coming. And everybody respected that. And if you came through the lane, you got it chucked, and that was it. Don't get dirty. If it got dirty, things are going to happen. You can't even touch anybody now. When they changed the defensive rule, right, they changed it to the defense cannot impede the offense. That's in the rule book. I'm like, what? That's what defense is, impeding the offense.
Yeah, it's a whole different game these days, even the way the game's played, of course, with the advent of the three-point shot throughout the last decade or so too. Just before we got recording, you were talking about playing against Dr. J and the impact that he had on you and also on your wife, Linda, in terms of her recollection of him in his playing days. Dr. J's final game was at Milwaukee in the 1987 playoffs. Do you mind just talking about some memories that you got with Dr. J and how his career sort of wound down against you guys in Game 5, I think it was, of the 87 playoffs, first round?
Yeah, Dr. J, like we talked about earlier, I've met a lot of famous people from the Eagles to Huey Lewis and the News and played golf with them, and obviously MJ and all those guys. But he's the one that really stands out as how great he was, but such class. The other people all have class, and he's one of the guys that my wife was a little starstruck to me because of that. He treated me with class, even that early years in Milwaukee when I was nobody. And he treated me with class when he was an all-star. The two things that stick out besides his huge hands, the first one is we played them when they retired his number in Philly. I remember warming up before the game, and they were running the video they're going to show at halftime. It was 2 hours before the game, and they were running it on the scoreboard. So I stopped warming up, and I lay on the floor, used a basketball as my pillow. There's a picture of that was in USA Today or something. And I remember watching his highlights on that screen. His number was retired after that. And then I remember that last game where he came out of the game for the last time in Milwaukee. It was really special because that's the first time we beat Philly in the playoff series, and we were going on to play Boston. It was his last game. I was the guy on the free throw line that was shooting my free throws while he was getting that standing ovation coming out from the great fans of Milwaukee that respected him. And I looked at Bigfoot Vetta or somebody. I said, listen, I don't need to shoot these. No one's watching me anyway. Just count them and let's move on.
I love it.
It was pretty awesome.
The rebound, Hodges to Mokeski, and a foul. And Julius Erving is going to go out, I believe. Yes, he is. Mokeski made 2 free throws.
And if you see that game, he walks off the floor, the referee gives him the basketball, and he walks off the floor into that tunnel holding the basketball up. And I was in that tunnel, turned around looking at that moment, and that stands out almost more than anything in my whole career.
Gives me goosebumps just thinking about that, actually. And the footage of that game, it does exist on YouTube, so it's definitely worth checking out. Just briefly, the following series, once you dispatched of Milwaukee, you'd go on to meet the Boston Celtics again in another epic series. This one went 7 games, and Game 3 went to overtime, and Game 4 double overtime. What was it like just to continually go up against these great teams throughout the 80s and never just quite get over the hump? You were a fantastic team, but just obstacles in your road throughout those 1980s playoff series.
It was a catch-22 because we had the best record in the 80s, I think, among all those teams. But we never got past that hump, and we always seemed to lose to Philly or Boston. It was very frustrating. The Lakers had already clinched the West, so whoever won that game was going to play the Lakers. We had beaten the Lakers twice that year already, pretty handily, 10 or 12 points, whatever. So we were confident. We won this game. We got a chance at a ring. We were up towards the end of the game, and I thought we had it. They won the game. And the battles between us and them that year in a 7-game series against a great team like that, with great crowds like that, and go in the Boston Garden like that, it just was phenomenal. That's like when you look at NBA history, that's what you see. You see games like that in the Boston Garden or the Mecca. A side note, it was a good year for me. It was frustrating and my wife was there with some other wives, and my agent was there. And back then, you walk out of the garden, and when you walk out of the garden, you go down the stairs, down the elevator, and you walk out, you're on the street. You're right underneath the railway system. So you're right on the street, right? So I remember walking out there, seeing my wife and hugging her and say, let's go get some seafood or whatever. And someone taps me on the shoulder. And I turn around, it's Red Auerbach. And Red Auerbach says, Mo, let's take a walk with me. And we walk around the corner to this freaking alley back there. And he goes, I just want you to know that, I respect your game, really like your game, and that Houston took you right before us in the draft, or we would have drafted you.
Oh, wow. What do you think when he says something like that to you?
Yeah, I'm like, well, thank you. Really appreciate that, Mr. Auerbach. I mean, he's a legend. And then afterwards, we go to dinner. I go, damn. I could have got some more championship rings over from another legend. That's something like with Dr. J. That stands out, that someone like that actually taps me on the shoulder and takes 2 minutes of his time to say that to me. that means something. I wish the league now would have more of that in it, like it used to. Veterans or figures like that talking to younger guys or guys in the league. It means a lot. That's the history of the game.
And there are moments that stick with you for the rest of your life, clearly, based on our conversation today.
It made me really proud and made me pissed off at the same time.
Yeah, I can understand that. Just dawned on me while we're talking, 1987, I believe, Milwaukee hosted in the off-season the McDonald's Open.
Yep.
The first one, as far as I'm aware. So there's two other teams, international teams from memory, and the Milwaukee Bucks playing in like a round-robin sort of competition. What do you remember of that sort of time and some of the greats that did get to come over and play in the States who were stars in Europe?
It was the big thing back then because international basketball was just a baby and just starting. And we hosted that in Milwaukee. The Russian national team came. I think Sabonis was supposed to come, but he was hurt. Marciulionis was on that team, and Volkovic, who played for Atlanta, he was on that team. And then we played the Italian team. And Bob McAdoo was on that team, and Mike D'Antoni played on that team. It was fun. It was exciting. We killed both teams. We played, I think, Russia the first game and killed them, and then Russia played the Italian team on the next night, and then we played the Italian team or whatever. We killed them too. But it was exciting to see the different style. It was just starting then, and there's such a stigma of, how good are those players over there? Can they play in the NBA? And it was just the start of, what is obviously a global game now. And that McDonald's Open was the start of that. And then I think the following year, I think Boston went over and played in Italy, I think, before the Dream Team made everything go crazy and made fans of everyone around the world. That was the start of that movement.
Yeah, absolutely. In 1988, Del Harris took over as head coach from Don Nelson, and you guys finished fourth in the Central Division and made it to the first round of the playoffs before losing to Atlanta 3-2. What was it like to have Del at the helm after having had Don Nelson coach you the entirety of your stay with the Bucks to that point?
Like we had talked before, that Del Harris was the one that brought me to Houston. I remember that I was pretty upset that I was traded right before the season. My then future wife, Linda, was telling me to calm down and, don't burn any bridges and be professional. And as it turns out, Del was brought on board in Milwaukee and then took over for Nelly. So I think out of my 12 years, I think 9 of them were either I was coached by Nelly or Del at 4 different teams.
Quite remarkable, isn't it?
They couldn't be more opposite, really. Nelly is a off-the-cuff, think outside the box, former player, free thinker, and Del Harris is a very disciplined, inside-the-box, more quiet person. And they both were very knowledgeable about the game in different ways. I mean, Nelly had played with the great Celtic teams and knew a lot from that side. Del, we call him the professor. And I've been around great coaches, Lenny Wilkins and Chuck Daly. But I think Coach Harris is one of the most knowledgeable people I've ever met about the game of basketball.
In 1989, it was your last season with the Bucks. The team finished 4th again in the Central Division, and then you took revenge on Atlanta in the playoffs in round 1, beating them 3-2, before losing out in the conference semifinals to the Detroit Pistons, who swept you on the way to the 1989 championship when they defeated the Lakers. What did you make of your final season in Milwaukee there, Paul?
We had another good team. We did really well. That series in Atlanta was a really tough series. We had a chance to close it out in Game 4 at home, and Jack Sikma, who shoots 90% from the free throw line, missed 2 free throws. And we lost that game, and he was devastated. And we went to Atlanta. Terry Cummings sprained his ankle, and he was one of our best players. And we went into Atlanta with not much hope of winning, really, according to other people. And Del Harris, Coach Harris, brought up the theme of we're going to walk the dog. And what that meant is we're going to kind of slow it down. We're going to execute our half-court offense. They had Doc and Dominique and Kevin Willis, and we were going to slow it down, try and out-execute them and win a tough game. that's what we ended up doing. And that last game, I ended up having, I think, 11 points, and I hit a 3 at the end of the third quarter, which was unusual back then for bigs to shoot threes. And we had a play at the end of the quarter where I would set a pick and then slip and to get ready to shoot the 3 if the guard hit me. And when you watch the video, it's funny because Mike Dunleavy was our assistant coach and had set that play up. And I step right into it, and I knock it down, and Mike's off the bench waving his fist in the air. And I think that put us up by like 5 or 6. But to recover what we talked about before, you recorded the game in Cleveland when MJ hit the shot over Elo. We watched that shot in the Atlanta airport because we were ready to board a plane to go back to Milwaukee and get ready to play the Pistons. And that's where we watched that shot happen. Because that would come back, because the next year, as we'll move on, I played for the Cavs and Elo and those guys. But we were so banged up. We had beaten Atlanta. We went to play the bad boys of Detroit, and we were just devastated. Terry Cummings had a sprained ankle. Paul Pressey separated his shoulder. Craig Hodges was hurt. I broke 2 ribs in game 2 or 3 in Detroit, and I couldn't play. We were just kind of limping in that series, and they pretty much wiped us out and went on. So it was a great series, the first round, and then the second round it kind of devastated us a little bit. But, and it ended up being the end for me in Milwaukee, which I didn't really know at the time.
I'll get to that in just a moment. I just had a quick look at Basketball Reference, and you made 11 three-pointers out of 51 attempts throughout your career, and I think that might be just regular season only that I'm looking at. So that's serviceable, particularly given at that time during the 80s, not a lot of big guys. Jack Sikma was one of those rare guys that did step out and shoot the 3, but that's quite good given that you didn't shoot a lot of threes throughout the decade.
Yeah, early in that year, at one point, for guys that shot more than 10 threes, Lambeer, Sikma, and myself were the 1, 2, 3 for a short period of time. But even back then, the great shooters, Larry Bird and guys like that, didn't shoot a lot of them like they do today. But
I just had a look at your Game 5 stats against Atlanta in 89. And, yeah, you had 11 points, as you said, 6 rebounds and 3 assists in about 25 minutes. So, as you said there with Del Harris and the walk the dog strategy, 96-92.
And I remember getting back on the plane and flying to Milwaukee and getting in the airport, and, there was like 5,000-6,000 people at the airport to meet us. It was pretty exciting.
For sure. Now, during your 6 full seasons with the Bucks, you were teammates with a lot of great players. There's going to be plenty that I leave off this list here, but you played with guys such as, and early in your tenure with the team, Dave Cowens and Tiny Archibald, very briefly, Marcus Johnson, Terry Cummings, Bob Lanier, Sidney Moncrief, Paul Pressey, as you mentioned his name a little while ago, Ricky Pierce, Jack Sikma, Junior Bridgman. The list goes on. Can you talk to some of those names and just the impact that they may have had on you, either on or off the court during that time that you were with the Bucks?
When I first got there, that was the older established team. It was Bob Lanier, Brian Winters, Junior Bridgman, Marcus. Sidney was there very young. And then we made that flip halfway through my stay there, and we made the trade, and we got Terry Cummings, Craig Hodges, Ricky Pierce, and then we picked up Jack Sikma along the way. But just great players, and to play with, for a short time, like you say, Tiny Archibald, Dave Cowens, who was, just a phenomenal player. And, they were on the end of their careers. Don Nelson brought them in to help the team and play, but they weren't the focus point. They were kind of the missing pieces that Nelly liked to put together. I ended up being one of those pieces later on in my career in Golden State, but I'm just so honored. 2 of my good friends and guys on that team, Jack Sikma and Sidney Moncrief, great players, better people, just great teammates, were inducted into the Hall of Fame. They will be this fall, and that's an honor for me to be their teammate. When I first got there and I was young in my career, and the way Sidney Moncrief and those guys took me under their wing and said, this is how you do it. This is how you be on a winning team. All those memories, and the people in Milwaukee, the fans. In the middle of my career, they started calling it Milwaukee. There's a nice Polish contingency there, a German, and, just great memories. Both our sons were born there. There were great highs and there were great lows. The ending of never getting to the finals. especially that year when we lost to Boston Game 7 in the Garden. And, we were primed for that game. And I remember sitting in that hot locker room, little tiny locker room in the Boston Garden, and Nelly saying, "This is what we play for, boys. This is all the marbles. You got to remember this. This is something that Game 7 in the Boston Garden." And, we just couldn't get over the hump, but more great memories with those type of players, and then thinking about what we didn't quite accomplish.
Thank you again for elaborating. It was late September in 1989, and you signed as an unrestricted free agent with Cleveland. Just before we get to your time with the Cavs, how did you learn that the Bucks weren't going to retain your services going forwards?
I played well for the Bucks, and we had lost that round, hadn't played as well as we should have the year before, so changes were coming. I had a feeling they were coming. I had been through the first change 4 years before when Bob Lanier retired, and they traded Marcus and Junior and all those guys. So it felt kind of the same way. I was on the other end of it before, and now I was on this end of it. Wayne Embry was the GM of Cavaliers. He has a history in Milwaukee. He had watched me play and liked the way I played, and they made a really good offer for us that, Del Harris and Milwaukee decided not to match. There were no hard feelings. It was an exciting time for me because I was starting to get, up in a little bit of money, for a contract and being thought of as a, big piece. I mean, they had Mark Price and Elo and Nance and Ron Harper, and they brought in Steve Kerr, and Tree Hollins was the backup, and I was going to eventually take his spot behind Brad Daugherty. So I was excited because they were, if you remember, they were the team that was going to compete or be the next Bulls, because Ron Harper was supposedly the next MJ, and they had played good against them. That nucleus was really, really good, and injuries and other things derailed that, which ended up derailing the process of my career because I was thinking I'm going there for a 1-year deal, and then after that signing a 3-year deal. But the Ron Harper for Danny Ferry trade, and then Brad Daugherty had a foot injury that never healed. I think it was infected and it never healed up. And he was a really, really good big back then, and people don't realize that, and the injury got him, so that kind of derailed that whole idea there in Cleveland.
Daugherty was fantastic. I think he made like 5 All-Star teams even in his shortened career due to those persistent injuries. This was your second tenure with the Cavaliers after playing for them early on in your NBA career. I think you played in 38 games for the season. What was it like the second time round, the separation of time?
It was a lot different. We had talked about the first time I was there in disarray and no real guidance and no direction. We were bad. We were really bad. People were wearing bags in the stands over their heads. We weren't good, and we knew we weren't good. But this time, I had an excitement because of the potential and the talent that was there. And they did find guidance, and they did find Lenny Wilkins. And I could see that if things would play out right, I could get back to the East Finals and maybe get to an NBA Finals with them.
Cleveland were building. They had a really good 89 season before the Bulls upset them because they were the higher seed in the playoffs before you joined the team. And then we're just building up to be Eastern Conference contenders for the championship as well in 92, particularly. In that 1990 season, you went 42-40 as a team and lost in the first round to the 76ers 3-2. Now this gets us to the last team that you played for on your NBA career, the Golden State Warriors. And again, you were reunited with coach Don Nelson. You were released by the Cavs after the 1990 season. And in mid-January of 91, you'd signed the first of 2 10-day contracts, similar to when you first began with the Bucks, I guess, looking back. And then you'd signed a deal for the rest of that season. You also were there when Run TMC, Tim Hardaway, Mitch Richmond and Chris Mullin were in the second and last of their 2 years together. So how did you adjust going to a Western Conference team, high energy, and being part of that and reunited again with Don Nelson?
It was really fun, really exciting. That year, after Cleveland let me go, I signed with San Antonio Spurs.
Huh.
Larry Brown was the coach. David Robinson was there. Sean Elliott. They had a good nucleus. And I went to training camp, and I played well, and then I tweaked my knee that had bothered me for a few years with my ACL. Wasn't right. So in the middle of that training camp, I kind of struggled, and ended up cutting me. They kept and really it came down to contract. Good news, bad news is, I've told players this. Good news is your agent negotiated a great deal. Bad news is I'm keeping the guy that makes less. And that's kind of what happened to me. They kept a young rookie over me. So I had gone to that training camp. My knee wasn't great. So I went home, really worked out really hard for a month or two, got my knee right, was working out 3 times a day, was in great shape, and didn't get any calls. So I was at home with Linda and the boys, and finally said, you know what? I'm going to call Nelly up. I'm going to call him because they have all these smaller guys and all this, and they have, Alton Lister, who's a big, and we played good together in Milwaukee, and they had Jim Peterson, and I was friends with him, but they needed a veteran big. So I called Nelly and I said, hey, fly me out there, try me out. If you like what you see, sign me to a 10-day. If you don't like what you see, I'll buy you dinner and all the beer you can drink. He said, okay, Mo, that's a deal. I'm not a stupid guy. And I knew, because I've been through it before, it was middle of the season. Alton Lister and Jim Peterson, Tyrone Hill was on that team. They were alternating and playing a little bit during the game, but not a lot. And the other guy, I knew they weren't in shape. It's been months now, right? So they play some, they don't play, they're not practicing. And I was in great shape. So when I went there, after a practice, Nelly said, okay, you 4 rookies, and then Mo, and then somebody else or whatever. We're going to play 3-on-3 full court. I ran circles around him because I was in shape and I was hitting my shot. I knew that was going to happen. And I played really good. And Nelly said, hey, I'm going to sign you to a 10-day. And then after the 10-day, he said, I'm going to sign you to another 10-day. And then after that, he said, I'm going to sign you for the rest of the year, and you can help us in the playoffs. And I had great years in Milwaukee and other places. That team was just special. Chris Mullins, Tim Hardaway, Mitch Richmond they're great ball players and unique in each way, but they're just really good guys. Rooney Marshallonis, the left-handed strong, he was so strong, and he was a great guy. And Jim Peterson and Alton Lister, Rod Higgins, just great people. We knew that those 3 were going to score, 80 to 90 of our points of our 120. And the other points go to 5 here and 10 there, and that was it. But that was okay. And we did our jobs, and they were phenomenal. But the team unit was something special. It was just a really neat time. And it was really fun getting out of Detroit, Milwaukee, Cleveland, snow, and getting into San Francisco where I'm wearing shorts to practice in January. That was really fun.
Definitely has advantages for sure. You played 39 games with the Warriors, including 3 playoff appearances. In the playoffs, you won round 1 against the San Antonio Spurs, and that was a nice little tidbit you revealed there. I didn't actually know that you had gone to training camp with the Spurs before that season started, so I missed that in my research.
They were the 2nd seed, and we were the 7th seed. We weren't supposed to have a chance, and Nelly, thinking outside the box, he platooned myself, Alton Lister, and Tom Tolbert, and Jim Peter. We're all 4 different players, and we would just run waves at David Robinson. And I remember after like the 3rd or 4th, I would come in the game after he battled Alton and then dealt with Tolbert's crazy game. And I see the look on his face going, who are you? What are we doing? What are you going to try to do to me? That was a huge win for the organization and for that team to upset the Spurs. And we had a little battle with the Lakers. And I believe, and you have the stats in front of you, I think it was game 2 in LA, and it was Magic versus Mully. One had 42 and one had 45 or something like that. It was just awesome to watch. They were like playing horse out there. It was.
I'm just checking it now. I think it's game 2 you're referring to. You guys had a 1-point win, 125-124. Mullen had 41 and Magic had 44. That is an old-fashioned shootout.
Well, it was impressive to watch. And, Magic is Magic. And I'm telling you, on a side note, people say who the GOAT was and all that. In my opinion, the GOAT is Wilt Chamberlain. So, he was just above and beyond. But if I had to start a team with everybody, I'm talking about put MJ out there, LeBron, whoever you want to, everybody in their prime, I think I'm starting with Magic. Because Magic, was handle the ball, passer, scorer, defender. He did whatever, and he made everybody else better. I mean, Larry Bird, phenomenal. MJ, one of the best ever. LeBron, okay, great. KD, whatever. But Magic was just Magic.
He was incredibly versatile. That was the one game that you guys won in the series. And then, of course, the Lakers would go on to make the NBA Finals in 1991, just before Magic would have ultimately retired for the first time due to the HIV announcement. Interestingly, throughout your career, there's numerous times you met teams that either made it to the finals or would go on to win the finals. You were really competitive and played on some great rosters, but just unfortunately, things just didn't go your way in particular series, I guess.
That makes me feel real good.
Yeah, sorry, Paul. Bit of a downer there. One other thing I read, actually, about your career was that Don Nelson asked for your assistance in helping to prepare for the Warriors' 1991 playoff run. How did that come to be?
Later in my career, I'd started thinking more as a coach and having some ideas, and Nelly was open to listening, And at that point, he had a system that for the playoff series, you study the film and the coaches study the film, but he also broke up people in guards, wings, and bigs. And the bigs would figure out how they want to play, say, David Robinson, and the wings would say how they kind of want to play their players, and the guards would do the same, and then we would come together, and the bigs would tell everybody how they're going to try and plan the play, so everybody would be on the same page. And it gave ownership to the players of the strategy of how we're going to play this series. And he had started that. And at that point, he knew that I had experience in the playoffs. Some of the other players had not. Instead of an assistant coach being in charge of the bigs, I was in charge of the bigs. So I took the notes. I broke down the film. I came up with some strategy and talked with the other guys about it. How do you think about three-quartering this guy or pushing him off the block or whatever that might be? That was the first time where my blood was flowing that, someday I think I want to become a coach. It was a blessing that he had the think outside the box and also the confidence in me to let me do that. And that's why we beat the Spurs, because of me.
I found it really interesting when I read that. Speaking of that San Antonio series, was it particularly satisfying for you to eliminate San Antonio, given that you were with them in the training camp to start the season, or did that not really come into it?
We're all human, and we all say that it doesn't matter. One game's the same as the other, or one series is the same as the other, but that's not true because we're human. And I did, because I went to training camp for the Spurs to be that third big behind David Robinson and whoever else they had to help them get from where they were to the finals. And I knew that in my mind that I could do that. Unfortunately, they didn't feel that way. So I kind of wanted to prove to them that, hey, yeah, see, I'm helping this team beat you in a series, and we're going on and you're going home. So, yeah, there was a little bit of that there.
Thank you for the honesty there. So once that season ended in 1991, I think it was in August, the team ultimately released you. Did you journey overseas briefly, or did you enter the CBA in the following year or two?
I was back home trying to get an invite to a training camp, and that never came. So, again, right before Christmas or right after Christmas, I decided, okay, I'm going to go play overseas. So I got a job with a team outside of Paris, France. And they weren't a very good team, and they were in a lower level or whatever. And, but I got mesmerized by overseas. I'm going to play overseas. And back then, they didn't have the D-League. They had the CBA. Thinking back, if I would have stayed home and just went and played for a CBA team, I was in really good shape, ready to play. My knee was feeling better. I think I would have got another year or two of my career, I think, with somebody. But we decided to take our family and go overseas and try and enjoy that for a little while. It didn't turn out anything like I thought it was going to be. It was a disappointment team-wise, culturally wise. It just wasn't what we wanted it to be, and it eventually it didn't work. I think I was there for 2 months, 3 months maybe. Good news is I lost about 20 pounds, but it was scary.
Is it because you didn't possibly like some of the cuisine that was on offer, or?
I am a picky eater. I'm a meat and potatoes guy, and It was good food, but I didn't eat much of it. It was like, bread and cheese and some wine. And, and by the time I came home, I was almost college. I was 255, I think. I haven't been 250. I played usually around 280. So I was like, whoa.
Quite lean. If I have the timeline right, it was around about September of 1992. You joined the Continental Basketball Association, or CBA, as you alluded to, the Quad City Thunder, first as an assistant coach, and then not long after that, you were a player too. In 51 games with the Thunder, according to one of the newspapers I looked at, you averaged about 6 points and 4 boards a game. How did you enjoy the role of player-coach?
It was interesting, very difficult. I had gone to what was then kind of the job opportunity where if you're looking for a coaching job, you go to the Chicago pre-draft camp where all the coaches and general managers are, and I knew a lot of them. And I tried to get an assistant job in the NBA, and it just didn't happen. And Dan Panaggio, who was coaching the Quad City Thunder, along with a couple other teams, CBA teams, came up to me and said, hey, we hear you're wanting to coach. Why don't you come here and be a player coach? In my mind, that meant, I'm going to learn how to coach and practice plans, but really it turned into be more of a player, which I didn't fight very much. I enjoyed playing. We had a great team. I think we were 18-2 or something to start. We had Chris Childs was our point guard. He ended up playing with the New Jersey Nets. We had Harold Ellis, who played in the league. We had Derek Strong, a power forward who played in the league. We had Mark Brisker, who played for the Atlanta Hawks. He was a shooting guard. We had myself at center. We had Barry Mitchell, who was a 6'6", great CBA player. When we were on that role, I thought, because the Dallas Mavericks were horrible that year. They were just really bad. They were like 2-18. And I told somebody, I said, I think we could beat them. I think, and then one of the players had a problem, kind of went AWOL. Really enjoyed playing again, kind of being free and having fun with these guys. And we ended up playing in the playoffs and losing to the Grand Rapid team. In the second to the final game, I hit a half-court shot that won the game. And then we played the last game. We ended up losing. And I still remember wearing my jersey back to the hotel, Motel 8 or some 6 or whatever, and not wanting to take it off because I knew it was the last time I have that jersey and I have that pair of shoes. Because I knew it was the last time I was going to play organized basketball. And it also stoked my fires even more for coaching.
That shot that you hit from half court, have you seen it since?
No, I doubt it. It was in Grand Rapids. They played in a nice little arena, but I doubt it.
It makes sense now because I read somewhere along the line, researching for today, that you enjoyed hitting half-court shots to win games or something along those lines, and I was wondering what it was referring to. I thought, when did that happen in the NBA? And you're talking about Quad City there, so that's interesting.
When you look at teams now, even now, and when I played at shoot-arounds or at the end of practices, still to this day, you'll go to a practice and you'll see guys shooting half-court shots for money, for $20 or $50, probably a lot more now. But I brought that to Quad City. After practice, we put $10 each down and shoot that. And when I hit that shot, all the players looked at me. I said, "See, could come in handy."
That's great. Following the stints there with Quad City, skipping a few things here, but you gained some more coaching experience with other teams, including the Hartford Hellcats, I think they were called, later known as the Pride.
Yep.
And then you're with the Connecticut Skyhawks. This is about mid-1990s, thereabouts, before, we'll skip a few years here, but you ended up getting your opportunity to be in the NBA in the 2000s, and you joined the Dallas Mavericks and then later the Charlotte Bobcats, I believe, assistant roles there. How did it feel to be involved with the NBA again, and what were those opportunities and time spent like?
It was a long road, and I know for time we have to skip over, but when you look back, I coached in the CBA as an assistant for a couple of years and a head coach. Then I coached at Stony Brook, Long Island in New York. Then I coached at USC on the West Coast as an assistant coach. So we were bouncing around. To get that opportunity in the NBA finally was just a real special time for me and my family. And, look on the staff. There's Don Nelson and there's Del Harris again. They were the head coach and assistant coach. And They brought me into training camp. They wanted to see what I could do. And after 2 weeks, Nelly in his old gravelly way said, "Hey, you're pretty good at this." I said, "Yeah, I told you, coach." He said, "I'm going to hire you."
I love it.
And that was a great run. Really. Talk about great guys. Dirk, Steve Nash, Mike Finley. Just extraordinary players, but just extraordinary people too. Great people.
I was going to mention that link again with the former coaches there, but you beat me to it. So it's great to see that those relationships continue to remain strong for so many decades. You obviously crossed paths with another friend of my podcast, Sam Vincent.
Yeah, well, when I was in Dallas, he was coaching the D-League team in Fort Worth, affiliate. So I had run into him in that summer. We actually coached together in the summer league, and then he was hired on board, and I was actually let go by Avery Johnson. And then I actually went and helped Sidney Moncrief coach Sam's old team, and Sam came on board with Dallas. Well, we had a little relationship going, and we kept that up. And then when he got the opportunity in Charlotte, he hired me, and he hired me as his assistant for the Jamaican national team also.
Ah.
And that really kind of bonded us. Coaching for the Jamaican team for 2 years was a great experience, and I was his assistant. So that kind of bond grew from that too.
Okay, I didn't actually put that link together because Sam did talk about his international coaching experience, and I didn't realize you were part of that roster too.
It was during the summer, so we did training camp in Kingston, and then we did some friendly games. The first year we had a tournament in one of the other countries, and we won that. And then we played the next year in the Dominican Republic in the tournament there. It was my first taste of upfront and personal international basketball, and the different way people did things, and which led to my further career with Great Britain. But that was my first taste there with Sam, and he let me do a lot. We had a great friendship, and we won that tournament. It was phenomenal. And then we played in that other tournament, which we lost a game. Roy Hibbert was on our team.
Huh.
He got hurt in the first game, and we ended up missing to go to Tournament of Americas by 1 game.
Ooh, that must hurt. Following those stints, I believe you had some more experience with the coaching side of things, including you ventured to Canada for a while, some more D-League, or now G-League it's called, experience too. So more recently, I guess, what's your involvement with basketball in the last few years, and perhaps what are you hoping to do in the years to come? Are you looking at possibly trying to get into a college or NBA position in any way, shape or form?
I went up to Canada and coached a few years. Most of my experience has been in the D-League, now G-League. As an assistant coach, associate head coach, we won the championship in RGV for the Rockets, and then went to the finals the next year. Chris Finch, who is now with New Orleans, he was the head coach, and the Rockets brought me in as someone that knew that league. I was a head coach in Reno with the Bighorns for 2 years, all the while trying to get back to the NBA. Actually, I'll backtrack, coaching with Chris Finch, who won championships in Belgium and a couple other countries. He's American, in England, I think, too. By my relationship and working with him there for 2 years, he brought me on board with the Great Britain national team. So we coached in the World Championships, and then ending in 2012 in London in the Olympics. In Dallas, I coached in the NBA Finals with the Dallas Mavericks, and then later on I coached in the Olympics with the Great Britain team, which was, really highlights of my career, and all the time trying to get back into the NBA. College is a different animal. It's just a different world. I did it at USC in Stony Brook a while back. I would love to do it again. It's a hard nut to crack to get in there. There's so much about recruiting now and what players can you get me and all that. I think I'd be an excellent recruiter and help players get better, but I've been trying that for years and haven't got any of that. 2 years ago, I coached in the North American Basketball Association. That's a minor league here in the United States, and last year that league changed its name to the TBL, the Basketball League, and I was commissioner of the league last year here in the States with 10 teams, and from Tampa Bay to New York all the way to San Diego, all across the country. And I'm moving on from that and looking to get back into coaching or scouting. I was here trying to get some feelers out in the NBA. It's really tough. After 27 years of coaching, I'm back in limbo, which this business is like that. I talked to somebody today and I said, you know what? I've been blessed to coach in basketball for 27 years. I've been all around the world. I've been into 42 countries and coached basketball games in there, along with clinics. Very fortunate. But out of those 27 years, I would say for my wife and my family, only about 9 of them have been where I felt solid. Okay, I got a job and I'm going to be here next year. That's scary. Everybody sees the Steve Kerrs, who's a great coach, great friend of mine, and, the Popoviches, and, there's only 30 of those guys. And then their assistants, and they move around too. So it's a tough business. Anybody that's listening around the world, or especially in Australia, if they're looking for a coach, a scout, or a consultant, I'm right here. I had a lot of experience. I worked very hard, and I would love to do that. One of my dreams is to get to Australia. That league is just exploding. And the Australian national team pretty much knocked us out of the medal round for the Olympics. 2012 in London, we had lost to Spain and Lithuania, and we had given Spain a good game, and then we beat China, and then we played Australia, and if we win that game, we go to the medal rounds. And we were up by, I think, 22 points at halftime, and we lost by 26. They had a great team, but I'm like, we're up by 22. There's only 20 minutes left. I've been through a lot of games. It was the fastest, craziest turnaround in basketball I've ever seen. The second half, everything they did went in, and everything we did. It was just amazing. Australia basketball has really intrigued me. That players are physical, knowledgeable, skilled, and that's kind of what basketball kind of used to be, at least the physical part. International basketball has coaching with Great Britain, playing Spain, France, Italy, Lithuania, Australia. Just watching that basketball and being around that it was really fun for me to see the way different countries play the game differently. And, the Spanish team was, with the Gasol brothers and Ibaka and, Ricky Rubio hardly even played on that team.
Yeah, there's a wealth of talent.
Yeah, but at this point, I'm towards the end of my career. I would love to end it, coaching, scouting, or consulting somewhere in basketball.
The National Basketball League here in Australia certainly is getting a lot of attention recently with some of the young prospects who are looking to enter the NBA draft in the coming seasons heading over here to play. And there's so few positions, as you said, in terms of what's available at the NBA level. But with your wealth of experience and playing career as well, I really hope that an opportunity does present itself. And hopefully someone who's listening to this episode might even just think you could be the person to fit a certain role for them. So you never know.
That'd be awesome. You'd be my first interview.
I'd get the inside scoop, hopefully. Basketball Digest had a regular feature which was called The Game I'll Never Forget. We could have already touched on it. Is there a particular game from your career, either on the court or off, coaching role, whatever it might have been, that stands out the most?
Game 7, Boston Garden, when I knew in my gut the team we had, if we could win this game, we can beat the Lakers and win an NBA championship. And that really stands out. My 2 last games at Kansas, where I scored back-to-back 30-point games, stands out. The loss against UCLA, unfortunately, stands out. The game against Australia in the Olympics, that stands out also. The run we had in Dallas when we went to the NBA Finals against the Miami Heat. We had beat Memphis, and then we beat the Spurs in Game 7, I believe. I was an advanced scout, so I was ahead of the team. So when we were playing Memphis, I was scouting the Spurs in Portland. And we were playing the Spurs, I was scouting Phoenix and Clippers. And when we were playing Phoenix, I was scouting Detroit and Miami. So I was always ahead of the team, flying back and forth and meeting the team and writing up my reports. And I was in charge of the notebook we had to begin every playoff series. It's 3 inches thick of every player and all the plays and everything, and getting that prepared. And then remembering that I'd done it for years before. I never got to hand out my last report. because you're a report ahead. So if you lose a series, all those hours and days of work in that book never gets seen really, but by you, and you hand them to the coaches. But I remember we went into Phoenix and we beat Phoenix, and we got on the plane coming back to Dallas, getting ready to go to the NBA Finals. Finally, I've never been to the NBA Finals. Handing out my scouting book for the last series against Miami to the coaches after we're celebrating on the plane, and then landing in Dallas with thousands of fans there in the big 737 doing an illegal maybe flyby. It was a feeling that, besides winning the NBA Finals finally, was something I'll never forget.
That's great to hear you elaborate on that, and thanks for sharing it. Just a random one. Did you have a favourite arena that you like to play in? I think the Mecca holds a lot of importance to Milwaukee fans. But was that one of your favourite? I guess you played there for so many years, it probably would be. But what other arenas sort of took your fancy?
I like the older ones. I like Madison Square Garden. I had my 21 points there. Boston Garden. The floor was terrible. If you dove on the floor, the wood and the screws, you'd get cut. There were dead spots everywhere. I remember going to shoot around and seeing a cat and walking around the stands, and it happened to be a rat. I'm like, are you kidding me? When you put those fans in there, it was just spectacular. And I would say Boston Garden and the Mecca, playing at home in the Mecca, against Philly or against Boston, it was special. Playing in the Forum, playing in the LA Forum against the Showtime Magic teams, and because I grew up there watching Wilt Chamberlain and Jerry West and Elgin Baylor and Gail Goodrich playing in the Forum, and then I got to play there. And Chick Hearn, the Hall of Fame announcer, was a great man. He knew I grew up in LA, and he always talked to me before the games, and he always said hi to my parents whenever we played. Hi to Casimir and Barbara Mokeski in Canoga Park, California, parents of Paul. But playing in the Forum was another one. Those four really stick out.
That's classy from Chick Hearn there to make a mention of your parents too.
I would always call them and they go, hey, Chick said hi to us.
Fantastic. The last question I'll ask you, you alluded to why you wore the number 44 earlier, talking about the great Jerry West. In terms of the particular significance of your jersey numbers, other numbers that you wore throughout your career, and perhaps it's just because other players already had 44 on certain teams. You rocked 54 in Houston,
yep.
53 and 44 with Detroit, and I believe 45 in Milwaukee in your first season before reverting to 44. Is there other significance behind those other numbers there, Paul?
No, I mean, that is exactly what you thought. When I was drafted by the Rockets, Dwight Jones had 44, so I took 54. When I went to Detroit, someone else had 44 because I was traded right before the season started. Was I picked 52 or something?
Basketball Reference suggests 53, but you know better than anybody.
This is the real one.
Oh, how good is that? Oh, that's great. Just for the context of the listener, you've just held up a Pistons 44 jersey. That is so good. Oh, man. It's just been a real thrill chatting with you today, Paul, and thanks again to Jim McElvain for helping connect us. Thanks for making yourself available for such a long period of time. I've really enjoyed it, and I hope our listener does too. And I just wish you all the best with any future opportunities that come your way.
Absolutely, Adam. It's been a pleasure. It's nice to see someone like yourself that's, keeping the history of the game alive and current, because it's so important that, people understand and get maybe a deeper look at what the game was like in the 80s or, before, every game's on YouTube and every game's on TV. I mean, heck, when I played, it was one game a week and then a regional game or whatever. And I really want to thank you. I enjoyed it a lot. It's been fun, man. I appreciate it.
No worries at all. Have a good one.
Yeah, you too.
Okay, thanks, Paul.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening. I welcome your interaction with the show. You can suggest topics or guests you want to hear conversations with. You can leave a voicemail. Simply visit inallairness.com/voice. Click Start Recording, leave your message, and press Stop. You can even listen back before submitting. Press Send, and you're done. Time now to share another great review from a fan of the show. Thanks to Jake Carroll, who is a Friend of mine here in Australia, Utah Jazz superfan, on Apple Podcasts Australia. It's titled Awesome Podcast and Podcaster. Now, I promise you I have not paid for this endorsement. And it reads, Adam is second to none regarding his knowledge of hoops, especially 80s and 90s. This includes his amazing encyclopedia-type knowledge of His Airness Michael Jordan. The range of guests and topics are always entertaining and informative. Keep up the great work, Adam, as I feel a kinship with you being a fellow hoops lover from the 80s and 90s era. Thanks again for all the work you do behind the scenes. Thank you, Jake. That's a fantastic review. Most appreciated, mate. Worldwide, the show now has 109 ratings on Apple Podcasts with an average of 4.5 stars. Thanks for your continued support. If you add a review, I'd love to read it out on a future episode. Your ratings and reviews are one of the best ways to support the podcast. If you enjoyed the show, as I do love to say, please tell your basketball-loving friends about it. Your word-of-mouth recommendations are truly worth their weight in gold. Stay up to date with my podcast and subscribe to my monthly email newsletter. You'll receive exclusive details on upcoming podcast episodes, future high-profile guests to appear on the show, and more. Simply visit inallairness.com/news. You can subscribe to my show in various ways. Search for In All Airness, 3 words, on your podcast app of choice. The show is on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Overcast, Android, Pocket Casts, and more. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show and share my web address with your friends and colleagues, inallairness.com. Check out the podcast archive for plenty more episodes with high-profile guests. Follow me on Twitter at inallairness. Please add your like to the show's social hub, facebook.com/inallairness. Join me next time for another edition of the show.